He sat in the car with the engine still running, hands locked on the steering wheel, knuckles white from the pressure. The sun hadn't fully risen yet. That gray-blue hour where the world is quiet, but a man's thoughts are the loudest. He stared at the front door of his own house, as if something terrible waited behind it. Like crossing that threshold would mean stepping back into a life built entirely on promises he never agreed to make. He wasn't scared of work. He wasn't scared of responsibility. He wasn't even scared of confrontation. He was scared of failing everyone at once. It was an absurd image from the outside. A grown man, exhausted not from physical labor, but from the invisible weight sitting permanently on his shoulders. The weight of being the reliable one, the strong one, the one who always holds it together. For years, it worked. Until that morning. The morning something cracked. He closed his eyes and exhaled slowly. The pressure in his chest felt almost physical, like someone was pressing a hand against his sternum, forcing him to admit a truth he'd spent decades avoiding. He couldn't keep living like this. Not another day. What exactly was this? Not a bad marriage. Not a horrible job. Not a tragic life. It was heavier than that, quieter than that, more suffocating than that. It was expectations. Layered, constant, unrelenting. He thought back to the night before, an argument with his partner, not even a dramatic one, just a familiar tension. You're not present enough. You don't show emotions. You don't help as much as you think you do. You take on too much at work and leave nothing for us. She wasn't yelling. In fact, that almost made it worse. Her expectations weren't crazy, but they were stacked on top of everyone else's. His boss's expectations, his family's expectations, his friends' expectations, society's expectations, his own impossible expectations. Individually, any one of them was manageable. Together, they were crushing. He looked down at his hands. They looked older than he remembered, not aged, exhausted, like they had carried too much for too long without ever putting anything down. And that's when it hit him, something he'd never said out loud, even to himself. I don't know who I am anymore when I stop being what everyone else needs. A quiet, brutal thought. But the moment it surfaced, another followed, softer, stranger, almost hopeful. What if I don't have to be all of that? What if expectations weren't destiny? What if responsibility had limits? What if he wasn't failing people, but they were expecting too much in the first place? That thought scared him more than anything. Not because it was wrong, but because it felt true. And here's the part that would surprise anyone who knew him. The pressure didn't start last night, or last month, or even in adulthood. No. It started much earlier, before he could understand it, before he could resist it. Years ago, with something he never told anyone. And that's where the Rayal story begins. He remembers being 8 years old, standing in the hallway of a small, quiet apartment where every sound mattered. His father wasn't violent. His mother wasn't cruel. But the atmosphere carried a constant sense of don't make things worse. A child learns fast in such environments, faster than adults ever realize. That's when expectations start to grow roots. He learned to read the room before he even learned to multiply. He learned to calm his mother when she cried over bills. He learned to stay silent when his father came home irritated and exhausted. He learned to be easy, understanding, helpful. He didn't do it because he wanted praise, and he didn't do it out of fear. He did it because nobody else seemed capable of keeping things together. A child shouldn't feel responsible for adult stability, but many do. And once a boy internalizes that role, it becomes part of him long before he ever gets a chance to question whether it's fair. One night, he overheard his mother whispering to a friend on the phone. "He's such a good boy, always so mature for his age. I don't know what I'd do without him." Those words shaped him more than she could imagine. Adults say things casually. Children hear them as commandments. From that moment, he believed, not consciously, but deeply, that love was earned through usefulness, through being reliable, calm, steady, through carrying burdens no one else wanted to acknowledge. He didn't resent it. He didn't understand it. He simply accepted it as his role. Years later, when people would call him the Rock, the dependable one, the guy you can always count on, he would smile politely, but a part of him always felt tired. Not physically, existentially. Because that dependable identity wasn't chosen. It was inherited. The first expectation he ever carried wasn't about success or money or masculinity. It was far more subtle. Make sure nobody gets disappointed. And so, he became the boy who never caused problems. Then the teenager who never said no. Then the man who took on more than he could handle. Not because he lacked boundaries, but because he had never been allowed to form them. This is the part most people don't see. Men who become quiet, reliable, emotionally steady pillars didn't become that way by accident. They were trained, rewarded for it, needed for it. So they learned to absorb pressure like a sponge absorbs water, silently, endlessly, until one day they're soaked through, heavy, leaking from the edges, and everyone wonders what went wrong. Back in the car that morning, he didn't think about any of this consciously. Memory doesn't hit like a movie scene. It surfaces as a sensation, a tightening in the stomach, a familiar fear of letting someone down, a reflex to push his own needs aside. And then another memory. He was 14, sitting on his bed, exhausted from school and chores, when his dad stood in the doorway and said, "I don't know what I'd do without you, son." A proud moment, right? Except the tone wasn't warm. It was weary, almost pleading, like his father had no one else to lean on. That's when the final part of the unspoken contract formed. If I stop performing, everything falls apart. Children don't negotiate contracts. They absorb them, carry them, grow into them, and then, at some point, they break under them. That morning in the car, he didn't break, not fully, but something within him shifted. He finally recognized that this lifetime of expectations wasn't normal or fair. It wasn't sustainable, and it wasn't making him stronger. It was slowly hollowing him out. But recognition alone wasn't enough. Change needed a catalyst. And that catalyst arrived in a way he didn't expect, quietly, almost insignificantly, the night everything finally snapped. A moment so small, so ordinary on the surface, that most men wouldn't even notice it. But for him, it became the turning point. It always happens in the smallest moments, not during crises, not at funerals, not during breakups, not in the middle of life-changing events. Men don't break loudly. They break quietly, under the weight of one more tiny expectation placed on a mountain already ready to collapse. For him, that moment came on a Thursday night. He had just come home from work, drained but carrying it well, as he always did. He placed his keys on the counter, took off his shoes, and gave himself a short moment to breathe. Not relax, just pause. A microscopic pause that nobody else would notice. Then came the voice from the other room. "Hey, could you help me with something real quick?" Real quick, two of the most dangerous words in a nice guy's life. He walked in, already preparing the mask. The neutral, steady, sure no problem expression that had become second nature. She pointed to her laptop. Something about an email she needed help drafting. Something minor. Something he'd done 100 times before. He felt the usual urge to say yes. To handle it. To fix it. To keep the peace. But tonight, something inside resisted. Not dramatically. Not angrily. More like a tired muscle refusing to contract again. He stood behind her chair, reading the email on the screen, and for the first time in years of constant reliability, unbroken helpfulness, disciplined emotional suppression, he felt it. I can't do this anymore. Not because of the email, not because of her, not because of the moment, because of everything that led to it. She looked up at him, waiting for that familiar agreeableness. That soft, of course, that dependable presence she'd grown used to, and perhaps even taken for granted. But behind his calm expression, something was unraveling. He wasn't angry. He wasn't frustrated. He felt empty. A dangerous kind of emptiness. The kind that whispers, "If I keep going like this, I'm going to disappear." His chest tightened, not from panic, but from the realization that he'd spent years, decades, being who everyone else needed, and almost zero time being who he needed. She said his name again, lightly annoyed now. Are you going to help or not? And that question, simple, clinical, unintentional, cut deeper than she could have imagined. Because after a lifetime of being the reliable one, to be asked that with irritation felt like a punch. Not because of the words, but because of what they confirmed. His effort had become invisible, expected, automatic, not appreciated, assumed. He didn't snap. Nice guys don't snap. He just exhaled softly and said, "I need a minute." It was the first boundary he'd set in years. A small sentence, a microscopic rebellion. She frowned. She didn't understand. How could she? He had never taught her anything different. He stepped into the bathroom, closed the door, and finally let himself lean forward, hands on the sink. He wasn't crying. He wasn't shaking. He was grieving. Grieving the years of swallowing disappointment. Grieving the identity of the guy who always shows up. Grieving the version of himself who believed this was the only way to be loved. Expectations had become chains, beautifully polished, socially approved, and impossible to refuse without being perceived as selfish. And as he stood there, the truth became painfully clear. No one had trapped him. He had trapped himself. By being so endlessly available, he had taught the world not to consider his needs. By never saying no, he had convinced people he didn't have limits. By making everything look easy, he had made his effort invisible. And for the first time, he allowed himself to think, what if I just stop? Not stop caring, not stop loving, not stop supporting, stop sacrificing himself, stop performing a role he never chose, stop carrying expectations that were never his responsibility. That single thought was terrifying, but it was also liberating. He walked out of the bathroom. She was still waiting, confused, a little irritated, unaware of the internal earthquake that had just happened a few feet away. He sat down, helped her draft the email, gently, calmly, competently, as always. But this time, something was different. A seed had been planted. A realization had taken root. A quiet transformation had begun. Not the dramatic kind, not the explosive kind, the kind that changes a man slowly, steadily, permanently. And everything that came after, the shift in his tone, the boundaries he began to explore, the subtle rebellion against his own conditioning, started on that Thursday night. The night when something finally snapped. Most people think a man's breaking point is loud, shouting, slamming doors, dramatic ultimatums. But for men like him, the nice guys, the reliable ones, the emotional shock absorbers of everyone's life, the breaking point is silent. It happens in a breath, in a pause, in a subtle shift no one else notices. Because when a man has spent his whole life avoiding conflict, his first act of rebellion is not explosion, it's refusal. And it happened on an ordinary Sunday. He was sitting in his car in the parking lot of a grocery store, the engine off, the world quiet, a plastic bag with 2 bottles of water on the passenger seat. He told himself he'd take a short break before driving home. His phone buzzed again, then again, then again. 3 messages from 3 different people, all needing something from him. Can you help me move next weekend? Can you talk? I'm having a crisis. You said you'd send that file today. He stared at the notifications. He didn't open them, didn't respond. Instead, he let the silence fill the car. For the first time in months, he wasn't rushing to fix anything. He wasn't trying to soothe anyone's panic. He wasn't trying to be the dependable man every person in his life treated like a 24/7 emotional service center. He felt tired, but not physically, existentially. A deep, bone-level exhaustion that comes from being relentlessly useful but rarely valued. The kind of exhaustion that makes you question if people like you for who you are or for what you provide. He rested his head against the steering wheel and whispered something that surprised even him. I can't keep doing this. And for once, there was no guilt attached to that thought. Just honesty. Pure, unfiltered honesty. He picked up his phone, opened the first message, and typed 2 words he had never allowed himself to say. I can't. He didn't add an apology, didn't soften it, didn't over-explain. Just, I can't. He sent it before he could talk himself out of it. Then he opened the second conversation, the one labeled urgent, the one where he usually dropped everything to help. "Sorry, man. I need you right now." His fingers hovered over the screen. The old programming kicked in. Be there for them. They need you. Don't be selfish. But the new version of him, the one born in that bathroom days earlier, pushed forward. This time, he typed, "I'm not available. Take care." Again, no apology. No over-explanation. No justification. He hit send. A small tremor ran through his chest. Not fear, not anxiety. Something else. Relief. A strange, unfamiliar sense of freedom. Almost like exhaling after holding your breath for years. Then came the third message, the one from work. A request that wasn't really a request. A subtle demand disguised as a friendly reminder. "You can send it tonight, right? You're always fast. You're always fast. You're always available. You're always dependable." People carved expectations into him like stone, and he never complained, never pushed back. Until today, he typed, "No, I'll handle it tomorrow." A simple sentence, a small rebellion, a new beginning. And as he pressed send, the world around him didn't collapse. No one screamed. No one punished him. No disasters unfolded. It turned out the catastrophe he always feared, the fallout from setting boundaries, existed only in his head. For the first time, he realized people didn't expect too much. He allowed too much. He wasn't angry at them. He wasn't resentful. He was enlightened. He leaned back in the car seat, letting the weight slide off his shoulders. Expectations he'd been carrying since childhood, since the first time someone praised him for being so mature for your age. Since the first moment he learned that kindness was a currency and usefulness was the ticket to approval. He didn't hate anyone. He didn't blame anyone. He just finally saw the truth. If you live your life as an answer to other people's needs, your own needs become the unanswered question. He started the car, the engine humming softly, and as he pulled out of the parking lot, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Control, not dominance, not aggression, not ego. Control of his time, control of his energy, control of his boundaries. And that small shift, the quiet no, the refusal to bend, the simplicity of protecting his own peace, marked the moment he stopped being defined by expectations and started defining himself. Most men's transformations look dramatic from the outside. Gym montages, new wardrobes, loud declarations of change. His transformation wasn't like that. It wasn't cinematic. It wasn't glamorous. It was subtle, almost invisible, like watching a cracked foundation slowly, silently reinforce itself from within. Because real change, the kind that lasts, doesn't begin with new habits. It begins with new beliefs. For the first time in years, he walked into his apartment without checking his phone. No scanning for missed messages. No anticipating who needed what. No bracing himself to be the solution to someone else's crisis. He tossed the phone onto the couch and let the silence settle. At first, it felt strange, uncomfortable, even. He'd spent so long drowning in noise. Expectations, requests, demands. That quiet felt unfamiliar, almost threatening. Like something was missing. But nothing was missing. For once, nothing was clawing at him. Nothing was pulling him in 10 directions at once. Nothing was draining him. It was just him, and that was enough. He made dinner, something simple, not rushed, not eaten standing up while replying to messages, not something he shoved into his mouth because he had to be somewhere or help someone. He cooked slowly, deliberately, slicing vegetables with care, tasting the sauce, letting himself enjoy the small, mundane ritual of feeding himself. It felt grounding. Then he did something wild, reckless, almost rebellious in the world he used to live in. He turned off his notifications. Not silenced, not muted for an hour. Turned off. For years he feared that losing connection meant losing relevance. That missing a message meant disappointing someone. That being unavailable meant being unworthy. But now, he felt the exact opposite. Being unreachable felt like freedom, a warm, protective force field between him and the rest of the world. Not to shut people out, but to finally let himself in. The next morning, he woke up without an alarm. No urgent beeping. No jolting from sleep straight into stress. His body stirred naturally, quietly. Sunlight slipped through the curtains. The room felt soft, calm, untouched. And as he lay there, he noticed something he hadn't felt in years. He wasn't exhausted. Not the usual exhaustion, the tiredness that sleep never fixes. The exhaustion of emotional debt, of overextension, of always being available, always being useful, always being the guy who helps. That exhaustion was gone. Not completely, but the grip it had on him had loosened. He got up, made coffee, and sat by the window. No rush, no schedule, no need to run the second he opened his eyes. He watched people outside, rushing to work, rushing to meet someone, rushing to prove something. For the first time, he didn't feel guilty for not rushing too. He felt human, not a machine, not a support beam, not a background character in his own life. Just human. Later that day, something unusual happened. His friend, the one who always called him only when things were falling apart, tried to reach him. For missed calls, a long, emotional paragraph, a guilt-laced, "I really need you." The Oldham would have dropped everything. He would have sprinted to the rescue. He would have twisted himself into emotional knots trying to fix someone else's storm. But the new him, he didn't react. Not out of coldness, not out of revenge, not out of resentment. He simply recognized something he had never allowed himself to admit. People who only reach out when they're drowning sometimes expect you to drown with them. And he was done drowning. After a few hours, after giving himself time, space, and clarity, he finally replied, "I hope you're okay, but I can't be your emergency number anymore." It wasn't harsh. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't dismissive. It was honest and boundary setting and necessary. His friend replied with anger, then confusion, then guilt tripping. But he didn't crumble this time. He didn't rush to justify himself, didn't apologize for protecting his energy. He let the conversation sit, let the emotions play out, let the world adjust to the new version of him. Something powerful happened in that moment. He realized the people who truly valued him would adjust to his boundaries, and the ones who didn't were only there for the benefits of his absence of boundaries. As the days passed, he noticed small shifts in himself. He spoke slower, stood straighter, breathed deeper. He took walks without headphones, sat in cafes without checking the time, looked at his own life the way he used to look at other people's, with attention, with curiosity, with care. He rediscovered hobbies he'd abandoned years ago, books he never finished, playlists he never had time to listen to, ideas he once cared about but buried under responsibilities that weren't even his. And then, the biggest shift of all, he stopped seeking approval. Not because he felt superior, not because he was detached, but because he finally understood something. Approval is a drug, and he'd been hooked since childhood. One compliment could keep him going for months. One thank you could justify all the sacrifices he made. One bit of praise made him a servant to expectations. But now, he didn't need approval. He needed peace. And for the first time, he was willing to choose it. He wasn't perfect. He wasn't done growing. He wasn't a fully transformed man. But he was rebuilding, slowly, quietly, deliberately. Not to become someone new, but to return to someone he had lost. Himself. When a man changes quietly, the world usually doesn't notice at first, but eventually, inevitably, it reacts. And the reactions reveal everything. Because when he stopped being available 24/7, when he stopped bending to every request, when he stopped anticipating everyone's needs, when he finally chose himself, certain people didn't like it. Not at all. The first ripple came from his workplace. Nothing dramatic, no shouting, no conflict, but something subtle shifted. His manager, who used to rely on him to fix last-minute disasters, suddenly realized he wasn't responding at 10 p.m. anymore. He wasn't accepting responsibilities that weren't his. He wasn't covering for coworkers who conveniently forgot deadlines. At first, the manager tried guilt. "I just don't know who else can handle this." But he answered calmly, "That's exactly why they should learn." The manager tried pressure next. "We really need this today." He replied, "You needed it days ago. Today is my off time." Finally, the manager tried fear. "You could lose opportunities by saying no." He didn't flinch. The wrong opportunities aren't opportunities. It wasn't rebellion. It wasn't confrontation. It was clarity. A clarity he had never possessed before. The second ripple came from his social circle. He began noticing who genuinely wanted him around and who simply wanted something from him. The friend who constantly vented but never listened, gone. The acquaintance who only invited him places when they needed a ride, a favor, or emotional support, silent. The buddy who used him as a therapist but disappeared whenever he needed someone, suddenly offended by his boundaries. But here's the thing that surprised him. He didn't mourn any of these losses. Not because he was cold, not because he didn't care, but because he finally understood the cost of keeping those connections alive. It wasn't friendship. It was emotional labor disguised as loyalty. And he was done paying for one-sided relationships. But not all reactions were negative. Some people actually respected the new version of him. The version that didn't over-explain, over-give, or overextend. One old friend even said, "You seem different, calmer, more yourself." And for the first time in a long time, he believed it. But the biggest, most unexpected reaction came from women. For years, he had played the nice guy role without even realizing it. Overly accommodating, always available, always understanding, always pleasant, always trying to avoid conflict, always hoping kindness would be reciprocated. It rarely was. Because nice wasn't respect. It wasn't strength. It wasn't confidence. It was self-abandonment dressed as politeness. But now, he wasn't performing anymore. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He wasn't trying to be chosen. He wasn't trying to earn affection through service. Women noticed. It wasn't arrogance. He wasn't flaunting anything. It wasn't emotional distance. He wasn't cold. It was something else. He had boundaries. He had standards. He had direction. And he wasn't afraid to walk away. That energy was magnetic in a quiet, unexpected way. One woman he'd known casually approached him one afternoon and said, "You feel different lately. In a good way. More grounded." It wasn't flirtatious. It wasn't suggestive. It was observant. The kind of comment men rarely hear unless something truly shifts inside them. And he realized something. When a man stops chasing validation, his presence becomes more valuable. Not because he becomes more attractive in a superficial way, but because he finally radiates something rare. Self-ownership. Still, the biggest transformation wasn't external. It wasn't about work or friends or dating. It was internal. He stopped apologizing for existing, stopped shrinking himself to make others comfortable, stopped explaining every decision, stopped fearing that being less available meant being less worthy. He started choosing what he wanted, what he needed, what he deserved. He started walking away from drama that wasn't his, problems he didn't cause, relationships that drained more than they gave, responsibilities dumped on him because he was the reliable one. And as he walked away from all those things, a strange thing happened. Life didn't fall apart. It got easier, lighter, more spacious. He had room to breathe, to think, to feel, to rebuild. He wasn't escaping responsibility. He was escaping unfair responsibility. There's a difference, a profound one. And in that quiet, transformative space he had created, something else emerged. Direction. Not a dramatic life purpose. Not a grand dream. Not a cinematic quest. Just a simple, steady desire to move toward the kind of man he truly wanted to be. Stronger, more intentional, more disciplined, more self-respecting. He didn't need to shout it. He didn't need to post about it. He didn't need validation for it. He simply lived it, day by day, step by step, choice by choice. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, he began to thrive. Not loudly, not publicly, but genuinely, from the inside out. There's a moment in every man's life, though nobody warns you about it, when you finally understand that the expectations placed on you were never really yours to begin with. For Daniel, that moment arrived quietly, not as a dramatic outburst, not as some explosive breakdown, but as a slow, steady realization spreading through his chest like warm water after years of living in ice. It happened one evening when he returned home from work. The same routine, the same exhausted footsteps, the same automatic sigh he exhaled as he loosened his tie. But for the first time in months, the apartment felt different. Not lighter, not heavier, just honest. He walked into his living room, sat down, and let the silence speak. And for the first time, he didn't fight it. He didn't fill it with tasks, responsibilities, or the voice of someone else's expectations echoing in his head. He simply sat with himself, a man stripped of every role he had been performing for others. And the truth came. Not like a whisper, not like a scream, more like a sentence he had always known but never allowed himself to read. I've been living for people who never even noticed. It hurt. God, it hurt. There's a special kind of grief that comes with realizing your love, your effort, your sacrifices were expected, not appreciated, almost invisible. But grief has its gifts, because once the pain clears, what remains is clarity. He saw his whole life laid out in front of him. The boy who was praised only for being easy. The teenager who avoided conflict to keep the peace. The young man who defined his worth by his usefulness. The adult who mistook exhaustion for responsibility. And the partner who believed love meant losing himself slowly. And that night, Daniel did something revolutionary, something no one around him would notice, but something that would change everything. He told himself the truth, out loud. I'm not here to carry everyone's expectations. I'm here to live my life. And for the first time, the words didn't feel like rebellion. They felt like freedom. Over the next weeks, small changes followed. Not loud ones, not dramatic ones, but the type of changes that rewrite a man from the inside out. He set boundaries, simple, firm, unshakable. He said no without apologizing. He spoke slower, chose his commitments more carefully, protected his time like something sacred. People were confused. Some were annoyed. A few quietly backed away. And Daniel learned something every man eventually must. The people who only liked you when you were breaking yourself for them were never your people. The ones who stayed, the ones who respected and knew him, those were the relationships worth keeping. And something else happened too. He began to dream again. Not the dreams society hands to you like a script. Not the dreams that look good on paper or impress the crowd. But his dreams, the ones he buried under years of duties and expectations. He picked up an old hobby, reconnected with an old friend, started taking long walks at sunset without explaining why, laughed more, slept better, breathed deeper. This wasn't a transformation. It was a return, a homecoming. Here's the truth most men never hear. Your worth is not measured by how much weight you can carry. It's measured by how much of yourself you refuse to lose. Expectations will always exist. Society will always demand more. Family will always want something. Partners may expect without asking. And the world will reward a man who breaks himself quietly. But no reward is worth a life spent performing instead of living. Daniel didn't become selfish. He didn't shut down. He didn't turn cold. He simply reclaimed control. And that's what makes a man strong. Not obedience, not compliance, not perfection, but self-ownership. The kind of strength that comes from knowing who you are, what you need, and what lines can no longer be crossed. Every man watching this knows the weight of expectations. Some carry it silently, some angrily, some for so long they forget it's even there. But here is the question Daniel eventually asked himself. If I don't choose my own life, who will? And maybe, just maybe, that is the question you've been avoiding too. Not because you're weak, not because you're lost, but because nobody ever taught you that a man has the right to choose himself. So let this story be your permission or your reminder. You don't owe the world your exhaustion. You don't owe anyone the version of you that breaks. You owe yourself the life you were meant to live, not the one others expected from you. The weight is real. The expectations are heavy, but the choice is yours.